Clara Lancaster sat on the marble floor of her bathroom, her hands trembling as she stared at the pregnancy test in her hands. The two pink lines on the test were clear and undeniable. She wasn't sure whether to be happy or scared. Her heart raced, not with excitement, but with terror. She had never thought this day would come, and now it was here. She quickly wrapped the test in toilet paper and threw it deep into the bathroom trash, hoping her husband Damien wouldn't find it. Clara's voice was steady as she called out through the bathroom door to the housekeeper, "Tell Mr. Lancaster I'll be down in a moment." Her heart was still racing, but she didn't let it show. She stood up slowly, looking at herself in the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at her was not the same one she used to be. She used to be lively, full of hope, with a bright smile on her face, but the years of marriage to Damien had changed her. Her once radiant face was now drawn with dark circles beneath her eyes. The weight of living with a man who was cold and controlling had worn her down. Designer clothes and perfectly styled hair couldn't hide the exhaustion she felt deep inside. She was only 32, but she felt older, like a part of her had been lost along the way. Clara took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, and left the bathroom. The grand staircase creaked beneath her feet as she descended into the dining room. Damien was already there, sitting at the head of the table. His salt and pepper hair was always perfectly styled, and he was already absorbed in his tablet, his attention fixed on whatever was in front of him. As always, he didn't even look up when she entered. His tone was sharp when he spoke. "You're late. The investor's breakfast is in an hour." Clara slid into her seat, trying not to let her nervousness show. The smell of Eggs Benedict on the table made her stomach churn. She hadn't been feeling well this morning, but she didn't want to show it. "I'm not feeling well," she said softly, trying to sound convincing. "Perhaps you should go without me." Damien stopped stirring his coffee and looked up at her, his gray eyes narrowing as he studied her face. "The Whitneys specifically requested your presence. They find you relatable," he said, his voice cold, with that familiar tone that made her feel like a tool to be used. He didn't see her as his wife. To him, she was an accessory, a part of his image, nothing more. "I really don't think I can," Clara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt like a lie, and she hated herself for saying them. But the fear of Damien's anger kept her silent. Damien's fingers tightened around his coffee mug, and he leaned forward, his tone taking on a dangerous edge. "We've discussed this, Clara. Your role is to support me, especially now when the company needs every advantage." His voice was stern, almost commanding. Clara nodded, feeling her stomach twist. She had played the part of the supportive wife for 3 long years, hiding her fears, her sadness, her frustration. It had been easier than standing up to him, easier than facing the consequences of defying him. She had tried to leave once, but he had found her, and the consequences had been worse than she could have imagined. There were no bruises, no marks, but the way he had grabbed her arm, shoved her into a corner, and made her feel so small, those memories haunted her. "I understand," she whispered, reaching for her tea with trembling hands. The breakfast passed in a blur. Damien was distant, absorbed in his own world, and Clara sat quietly, trying to appear as the perfect wife. They spoke of small things, of nothing important, just the usual talk they had at every meal. Clara smiled when she was supposed to, nodded at the right moments, but inside, she was drowning. Her mind was focused on the little life growing inside her. She couldn't stay in this marriage anymore. The child deserved more than just survival. It deserved safety. It deserved love. After breakfast, while Damien took a shower, Clara retreated to their bedroom. She opened her laptop and logged into her private email account. For years, she had kept this secret from her parents. She had hidden the truth of her marriage from them, not wanting them to know how controlling and manipulative Damien was. But now, she needed help. She needed to get out. Clara typed a quick message to her parents. "Mom, Dad, I'm coming home. Please don't ask questions yet. I just need to know if I can stay with you for a while. Love, Clara. The reply came within minutes, and it was everything Clara needed to hear. Our door is always open, sweetheart. Always. Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She wiped them away quickly, closed her laptop, and began to prepare for her escape. That evening, Damien returned home later than usual. He was frustrated after a difficult meeting, and Clara listened as he vented. Richardson is threatening to pull his investment unless we make significant changes, he muttered, pouring himself a drink. I need you to be there for me, Clara. I need your support. Clara stood in the doorway of his study, her heart pounding. She had heard this all before. He needed her, only when it suited him. But she had made up her mind. I'm sorry to hear that, she said softly, her voice betraying no emotion. Damien took a long sip from his drink. This is when I need you the most, Clara. When everything I've built is at risk of crumbling. You're the only one who truly understands what's at stake. Clara fought the urge to roll her eyes. She knew exactly what was at stake, but it wasn't just about his business. It was about her life. She wasn't going to spend another day trapped in this marriage. I understand, she said quietly. Would you like me to run you a bath? Damien looked at her, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Yes, that would help. As Damien soaked in the bath, Clara moved through their bedroom with quiet efficiency. She had packed a suitcase with the essentials earlier in the day. She had withdrawn cash in small amounts, enough for the journey ahead. Damien always took sleeping pills after a stressful day at the office, and tonight she knew he would be no different. An hour later, she watched him drift off to sleep, his breathing deep and regular. The moonlight filtered through the bedroom window as Clara slipped out of bed for the last time. She placed her wedding ring on Damien's nightstand, the metal cold and heavy in her hand. Without a sound, she left the house, walking out of the life she had once tried so hard to build. The drive away from Boston was surreal. The streetlights blurred past as Clara made her way toward her hometown, toward freedom. She thought of her childhood home, the house where she had felt safe, loved, and protected. Her parents had always been there for her, even when she was too proud to admit that she needed them. She thought of her best friend, Marco, and how she had hurt him when she chose Damien over him all those years ago. But now, she couldn't think about Marco. She had too much to focus on. By the time Clara reached her hometown, the sun was just beginning to rise. She pulled into her parents' driveway, the familiar old Victorian house standing silent and proud in the early morning light. The door swung open and her mother appeared, arms wide. Clara stepped out of the car on shaky legs, exhaustion and relief washing over her all at once. Her mother's embrace felt like home. Welcome home, baby, her mother whispered, holding her close. The warmth of her mother's arms, the safe feeling of being home, was enough to make Clara finally let go. She cried, deep, racking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. Her mother didn't ask questions. She just held her, letting her daughter grieve. The next morning, Clara woke up in her old bedroom. The smell of breakfast wafted up from the kitchen, and the sound of birds chirping outside the window brought her back to reality. She was home. Safe. Her mom was already busy in the kitchen, flipping pancakes. Clara joined her, feeling the comfort of being cared for again. Her dad was out running errands, and when he came back, he embraced Clara tightly. He noticed how sad she looked, and his heart ached for his daughter. Clara sat down at the kitchen table, her heart still heavy. Mom, I'm pregnant, she said quietly, her hand resting on her stomach. Her mom paused for a moment before setting down the spoon she was holding. She took a deep breath and looked at Clara. How far along are you? About 8 weeks, Clara replied. I only found out yesterday. Her mother nodded slowly, understanding. We suspected something was wrong. We didn't want to push you, but we could see it. We knew you weren't happy. Clara's heart filled with guilt. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. she whispered. Her mother shook her head. You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. Later that day, Clara sat on the back porch swing, wrapped in a quilt. Her dad joined her, his arm around her shoulders. The afternoon was quiet, the world peaceful around them. Her dad broke the silence. I'm going to be a grandfather, he said gently. Your mom tells me the news. Clara smiled weakly. It was hard to imagine being a mother herself, but she was ready to try. I'm so sorry, Dad, she said. I should have told you what was going on. Her father's voice broke a little. I should have seen it, Izzy. I should have seen what he was doing. I should have protected you. Clara squeezed her dad's hand, feeling the weight of everything she had been through. It's not your fault, she said quietly. I couldn't see it either until it was too late. Her father's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, Clara saw him as vulnerable. You're the strongest person I know, Clara, he said. You always have been. Marco was teaching Clara how to skateboard in the school parking lot. He was patient with her, helping her every time she stumbled. When she thought about him, she felt a little tight in her chest. Have you seen Marco around town? She asked her father, feeling nervous. Her father smiled kindly. He took over his father's doctor practice last year. He does a lot of house calls to help old people who can't make it to the clinic easily. Clara remembered that Marco was always the kind one, the person who helped others before they even asked. She tried to push away the memory of their last conversation when she had hurt him by telling him about Damien's proposal. The town has changed, her father continued, but some things never change. People still care for each other here. Her father's words made her feel safe. Back in Boston, she was alone and didn't have anyone to help her. But here, in the small town, people still cared about each other. Suddenly, the screen door creaked open, and her mother, Elena, came in with a tray of 3 mugs of hot chocolate. Just like when you were little, Elena said, giving Clara and her father the mugs. I think the guest room would make a nice nursery. It gets the morning sun, and that big oak tree outside will give shade in the summer. Clara's hand shook a little as she held her mug. Mom, I can't impose. Elena interrupted gently. This is your home. It always has been. You and the baby belong here. Clara felt something change inside her. The fear she had been carrying for so long started to fade, and a feeling of hope began to grow inside her. She listened to her parents talk quietly while sipping her hot chocolate. She could see some cardinals flying around outside the window. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring new challenges. She needed to find a lawyer, a doctor, and start a new life. Damien wouldn't let her go easily, but for now, she was home. She was safe. 3 days later, Clara found herself sitting in the waiting room of Dr. Lucinda Chen's office. The room was small and cozy, with pictures of nature on the walls. It felt very different from the big, fancy doctor's offices in Boston. Clara was feeling more sick than usual, and her mom had insisted she see a doctor right away. Dr. Chen is the best around here, her mom had said, not mentioning how quickly the appointment had been arranged. Clara flipped through a magazine about pregnancy, trying to forget the nervous feeling in her stomach. She hadn't told her parents about her other worry, that the stress from escaping Damien might hurt the baby. Mrs. Lancaster, a nurse called. Clara flinched when she heard her last name. She'd have to change that soon. The nurse led her into a room with a window that looked out at the mountains. While she changed into a hospital gown, she heard voices in the hall. One of the voices was deep, and it made Clara freeze. The Harrison case files are on your desk, Dr. Chen, a man's voice said. Then the door opened. It felt like time stopped. Marco stood in the doorway, holding a medical chart. He looked so different. He was still handsome, but he had grown up. His hair was shorter now, with some silver streaks at the sides. He looked surprised to see her. Clara, he said softly. Then he quickly looked away and said, I didn't know you were coming here. It's okay, Clara said, feeling embarrassed. I'm just consulting on some cases. Marco explained. Dr. Chen appeared behind him, and Marco stepped aside. "I'll leave you to it," he said before walking out. The meeting was over quickly, but Clara's heart was beating fast. Dr. Chen closed the door with a smile. "Well, that was interesting," she said. "Shall we focus on you and your baby now?" The rest of the appointment went smoothly, with Dr. Lai Chen being very calm and helpful. The ultrasound showed the baby's heartbeat was strong, and everything looked good. "Your blood pressure is a bit high," Dr. Chen said, "but with everything you've been through, that's not surprising. I recommend some prenatal yoga to help you relax." Clara nodded, still thinking about her awkward encounter with Marco. After the appointment, Dr. Chen handed her a business card. "This is a counselor who helps women leave difficult situations," she said. "Everything you tell her will be private. Clara, you're doing the right thing." Outside, the wind was blowing leaves across the parking lot. Clara thought about calling her mom for a ride home, but before she could decide, she heard a familiar voice. "Let me drive you," Marco said. He was standing next to a navy blue SUV holding keys in his hand. He wasn't wearing his doctor coat anymore, just a sweater. "I don't want to impose," Clara said. "It's going to rain," Marco said, his voice soft but firm. Clara hesitated but then agreed. The inside of his car smelled like leather and something herbal, probably from the tea he always drank instead of coffee. They drove in silence for a while, the tension between them thick. Finally, Marco spoke. "Your parents told me you were back, but I didn't expect to see you in a doctor's office," he said. His hands were tight on the steering wheel. "I don't like seeing you scared." Clara felt something crack inside her. "The Clara you knew was an idiot," she whispered. "She thought she could handle everything." Marco's voice became sharp. "Don't let him make you doubt yourself." Clara looked at him, surprised by how strong his words were. "You don't know what happened," she said softly. "I know enough," Marco said, his voice tight. "I know the light in your eyes disappeared in pictures. I know you stopped calling your parents. I know you flinched when someone moved too fast at your grandmother's funeral." "Were you watching me?" Clara whispered. "I never stopped," Marco said, his voice full of emotions. Clara's heart pounded. She had left the town and chosen a different life, but now, with Marco here, it felt like maybe she could be strong again. "I'm pregnant," she blurted out. "I know," he said. "Dr. Chen mentioned you were high risk. Isn't that a privacy violation?" Clara asked. "Probably." Marco smiled a little. "Write me up if you want." The familiar teasing tone made Clara laugh, and she felt tears in her eyes. "Some things never change," she said. Marco reached into the glove compartment and handed her a tissue. "I wasn't prepared to see you today," he said quietly. The rain started to fall harder, drumming on the roof of the car. Clara found herself speaking again. "I don't know what I'm doing, Marco. I left with nothing but some clothes and whatever cash I could get without Damien knowing. I'm having a baby. I don't have a job. And eventually he's going to find me." "You're surviving," Marco said gently, "and you're not alone. This whole town looks out for each other." "I'm not that girl anymore," Clara said, feeling unsure. "No, you're stronger now," Marco said. "You got out. That takes a lot of courage." Clara looked at him, really looked at him. Marco had changed too. There were little lines around his eyes and a small scar near his temple. But the way he looked at her like she was precious and strong hadn't changed at all. "I should have listened to you back then," Clara whispered. "No," Marco said quickly. "You needed to make your own choices, even the wrong ones." The rain slowed down and Marco started the car again. They drove in silence, both thinking about the past and what might have been. When they reached Clara's parents' house, she turned to him. "Do you know where the prenatal yoga classes are held?" she asked. "The community center," Marco replied. "They're on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. And my clinic is right next door if you need anything." "Thank you, Marco," Clara said. She meant more than just for the ride, and Marco understood. As he drove away, Clara felt something change inside her. The girl who left this town was gone. In her place stood a woman who had survived and was learning to be strong again. Maybe, just maybe, she was ready to believe in second chances. Meanwhile, far away in Boston, Damien Lancaster woke up to silence. The sun was shining through the blinds, just like it always did, but when he reached for his wife, the bed was cold. Clara wasn't there. He checked the bathroom, the closet, and her car, but she was gone. He picked up her wedding ring from the nightstand, feeling the first crack in his perfect, controlled life. He called for the housekeeper, Regina, and asked her where Clara was. She told him she hadn't seen her, and when she tried to call Clara's phone, it went straight to voicemail. Damien's jaw tightened. Something was wrong. The first thing to break was a glass whiskey cup. It hit the wall and broke into pieces. Regina jumped but stayed still, knowing from experience that she should wait out the storm. "Get out!" His voice was calm but scary. Once he was alone, Damien started breaking things around the house. Clara's vanity fell and her perfume bottles broke, filling the room with strong smells. He tore her clothes from the hangers and they ripped under his anger. He stopped when he got to her laptop. He was still mad, but now he was thinking. He opened her computer, and even though it had a password, Damien had already put tracking software on everything she owned. It only took a minute for him to see what she had been doing online. "Clever girl," he said, finding that she had deleted most of her history, but he could still see a bank statement with many small withdrawals over the past week. There was also a search for bus schedules and an email to her parents that she hadn't fully deleted. His phone rang. "What?" he asked, his voice hard. It was his assistant. "The board members are waiting in the conference room for the Richardson meeting," she said nervously. Damien checked the time. It was 8:30 in the morning, and he had problems at home, sir, but the world was still going on. "Tell them I have a family emergency. We'll reschedule for tomorrow," he said. For the next hour, Damien made calls to the bank, credit card companies, and private investigators. Each conversation made him feel like he was losing more control over everything. "What do you mean you can't freeze the accounts?" he asked angrily. "I'm her husband." "Sorry, Mr. Lancaster, but the accounts are in her name only. Without proof of fraud, we can't do anything." "May," the banker answered. Damien ended the call, swearing. The financial reports weren't good. His company was losing money fast, and now Clara had taken more. His phone buzzed with a text from William Richards, his head of security. "Traffic cameras saw her car going west on I-90 at 2 a.m., the message said. Damien stared at his phone. She was going to her hometown, west of Boston. He called someone he hadn't spoken to in a long time. "CH Detective Morrison, James," a gruff voice answered after 3 rings. "I need a favor," Damien said. "My wife is missing. She took some money and some of her things. I'm worried about her." Morrison's tone changed. "No signs of foul play?" he asked. "No," Damien said. "She's been unstable lately. I'm worried she might hurt herself." "You want me to track her down and make sure she's safe?" Morrison asked. "Exactly," Damien said, relieved. He trusted Morrison to be discreet. "Money's no object. I'll send you everything you need," Damien said. "Keep this quiet. If the press finds out the CEO of Lancaster Industries can't even keep track of his wife, it'll be a disaster." "I understand," Morrison replied, and Damien ended the call. He looked out his window at the Boston Public Garden. It was fall, and the trees were bright with reds and golds. Clara had always loved this season. Damien remembered their first autumn together, walking in the park and dreaming of their future. He'd given her everything: money, power, a perfect life, and now she was running away. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Lancaster, Mr. Richardson's office is online. They're demanding repayment of the loan," his assistant said. Damien straightened his tie, ready to deal with the crisis. He had built his company from nothing with hard work and control. Clara was just another problem he would solve. The rest of the day was full of meetings and phone calls. By evening, Damien was alone in his study, drinking scotch and scrolling through photos of Clara. She had always looked perfect at charity events and business dinners, but now her plan to run away made him feel a mix of anger and respect. The Clara he married was sweet and easy to control, but this new Clara was smart and sneaky. His phone rang again. It was Morrison with an update. "I got something," he said. "Gas station security footage shows her stopping for coffee around dawn." Kinner. Damien's grip on his glass tightened. "So she really went home," he muttered. "Want me to go there?" Morrison asked. "No. I'll handle it. Keep an eye on her from a distance and send me everything you find." Damien hung up and checked his schedule. The Richardson crisis would take a week to fix. After that, he would deal with Clara. He smiled coldly. She could try to hide in her small town, but she was still his. She'd learned to love him once, and he would make sure she learned again. He picked up her wedding ring from his desk, put it in his pocket, and promised himself he would put it back on her finger soon, and this time it wouldn't come off again. Clara went to her first prenatal yoga class at a community center. The room smelled fresh with lavender and new bamboo floors. She set her mat in the back corner where she could see both doors out of habit. A pregnant woman with red hair named Tessa smiled and said hello. "This is my second baby, but my first time doing yoga," Tessa said. "I'm Clara," she answered. Tessa gave her advice to stay near the fan because it could get hot. As more women joined, the instructor, Grace, started the class with breathing exercises. While doing yoga, Clara kept looking at the clinic across the street. She thought she saw Dr. Marco looking up at the studio, and it made her feel nervous. Or maybe it was just her morning sickness. After class, Tessa asked Clara to join them for tea at Lily and Rye, a cozy cafe nearby. Clara wasn't sure, but she decided to go anyway. It turned out to be a cute little cafe with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. The smell of coffee was comforting, so different from her life in Boston. Tessa talked about pregnancy cravings. "When I was pregnant with my first baby, I craved pickles and chocolate," she said, laughing. "My husband thought I was crazy." Clara smiled. "For me, it's mostly nausea," she said. "Everything smells too strong." Amy, a local librarian, suggested ginger tea. A woman named Sienna brought them their drinks. "On the house," she said to Clara, "Elena mentioned you're back in town." The women talked about gossip, pregnancy tips, and local events, but no one asked about Clara's life in Boston or her marriage. It was nice to just be part of normal conversation. Clara's hand touched her bare ring finger, and she thought about how she wasn't wearing her wedding ring anymore. As they finished their drinks and said goodbye, Clara decided to walk home. It was a nice day and the air felt crisp. She passed the law office where she had scheduled a consultation and the realtor's office with local house listings. She even passed by Dr. Marco's clinic, where she saw him through the window with a patient. Just as she was walking past, Alina, her mom's friend, appeared behind her with grocery bags. "Here, help me with these bags. I'm making your favorite pot roast tonight," Alina said. As they walked together, Alina talked about the town news, like the high school needing a new teacher and the community theater planning a holiday play. It felt like a normal life, and for the first time, Clara felt like maybe she could be happy here. "I've been thinking about looking for a job," Clara said carefully. "Nothing fancy, just something to do." Elena suggested working at Lily and Rye part-time. It was a flexible job with friendly people, perfect for Clara as she figured out what to do next. Clara felt like maybe, just maybe, she could start over. A month ago, serving coffee would have felt silly, but now it felt like freedom. Clara checked her phone. No missed calls, no strange messages. Her lawyer had helped her file a restraining order, but a piece of paper wouldn't stop Damien if he really wanted to find her. She pulled out her new laptop, which she had bought with cash, and started looking for job listings, apartment rentals, and prenatal resorts. Small steps toward becoming independent. There was a knock at the door, and Clara froze. "Package for Harris residence," a voice called. She peeked through the peephole and saw the UPS delivery person. After the delivery person left, she opened the door to get the package. It was baby books her mom had ordered. One book caught her eye: Strong Mother, Strong Baby, a guide to pregnancy after trauma. She ran her fingers over the cover, feeling her throat tighten. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tessa. "Birthing class starts next week. Already signed up. You in?" Before she could think too much, Clara replied, "Yes." That evening, Clara helped her mom, Elena, prepare dinner. The kitchen radio played soft jazz, and Elena hummed along while showing Clara how to make her grandmother's secret gravy recipe. The familiar scene felt like a gift, something she hadn't appreciated before. "I ran into Grace from yoga," Elena casually said. "She says you did well today." "It felt good," Clara admitted. "Normal is good." Elena smiled. "Normal is healing." The sound of her father's truck pulling into the driveway made both of them smile. He came inside carrying an old wooden cradle, the same one Clara had slept in when she was a baby. "Found it in the attic," he grumbled. "Needs sanding, maybe some paint, but the bones are solid." Clara gently touched the worn wood, imagining her own child sleeping there. For the first time, the future didn't seem so scary. Later that night, as she read in bed, she overheard her parents talking. "She's looking better, more like herself," her dad said. "Still too thin, though, and those shadows under her eyes. She's pregnant, worried, and healing. Give her time." Clara closed her book, one hand resting on her flat stomach. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, making a promise to herself and her unborn baby. One day at a time. Her phone lit up again. It was Marco. "Saw you at yoga. There's a great prenatal nutrition class next week if you're interested. No pressure." She smiled and typed back, "Time and place." Small steps forward, she thought. Even though the shadow of her old life still followed her, she was making progress. Meanwhile, Damien Lancaster stood at the big windows in his Boston office, watching a storm come in from the harbor. Lightning lit up the city, reflecting off the tall buildings that represented everything he'd built and everything he was about to lose. "The numbers don't lie," his CFO, Richard Morrison, said, spreading financial reports on the table. "Richardson pulling out was just the beginning. 3 more big investors are thinking about leaving." Damien stared out the window, a slight shadow under his eyes from 2 weeks of sleeping in his office. "What's our exposure?" Damien asked. "Well, worst case, we could lose 40% of our market value by the end of the quarter," Morrison said. "The board's getting nervous." Damien's phone buzzed with a new message from his private investigator, but he didn't check it. He focused on the crisis in front of him. "Schedule an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning." Morrison hesitated. "They'll ask about Clara. She didn't show up at the Whitney fundraiser last week. There are rumors." "Handle the rumors," Damien said coldly. "That's why I pay our PR team." After the meeting, Damien looked at the investigator's message, a blurry photo of Clara entering a lawyer's office in Berkshire County. Damien gripped his phone tightly. He felt a cold anger rise within him. "Get me Dr. Matthews on the phone," Damien said, ordering his assistant. 10 minutes later, he was talking to Clara's old therapist. "Yes, I'm very concerned about her mental state. She's been unstable, and the pregnancy hormones are affecting her judgment," Damien said, hanging up with a smile. The pieces were coming together. The next morning, Damien faced the board, his usual confident self. "I understand your concerns," he said. "I'm temporarily stepping back from day-to-day operations to focus on some personal matters. In my absence, Oliver will serve as interim CEO." The board seemed pleased, but Damien caught his brother's surprised look. Yes, Oliver had taken control for now, but Damien knew this was just a temporary setback. After the meeting, he called his private investigator. "I need everything you can find on Dr. Marco Romano in Berkshire County. It seems he's been spending time with my wife." Damien studied a surveillance photo of Clara looking up at a medical building. Everyone has secrets, he thought. That evening, Damien packed a small suitcase. He had given Oliver control of the company for now, but that just meant he could focus on what really mattered. Clara. He would remind her who she belonged to. He called his assistant. Hold all my calls. I'll be taking a trip to Berkshire. Meanwhile, Clara was settling into a new routine. After 3 weeks at Lily and Rye, she was getting used to waking up early, fighting morning sickness, and working at the cafe. One morning, as she made green tea for Marco, she noticed a dark sedan parked across the street. It had been there yesterday, too. She tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being watched was hard to shake. Marco noticed she seemed off. "You okay?" he asked. "Just tired," Clara replied. Later, as Marco was leaving, he asked, "Would you like to have dinner with me this Saturday? Just us, not as doctor and patient, but just me?" The question hung in the air. Clara looked at the familiar lilies swaying in the breeze and smiled. "Yes," she whispered. "I'd like that." Later that evening, Clara helped her dad clean up after dinner, humming softly as she did. James raised his eyebrow but didn't say anything, a small smile on his face. Clara's phone buzzed with a text from Tessa saying, "Spotted you in Marco's car. Spill the tea." Before Clara could reply, another message came through from her lawyer, asking if she could come in tomorrow because there were some troubling things to discuss. Clara felt a chill. Somewhere out there, Damien, her husband, was surely planning his next move. The dark cars parked outside the cafe weren't just a coincidence. But when Clara got ready for bed, she couldn't stop thinking about Marco's smile, how he made her feel safe without controlling her. Maybe, just maybe, she could find happiness. Her phone buzzed one more time. It was Marco saying, "Hey, thank you for saying yes in the dark." Clara smiled. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring, but tonight she would hold on to the feeling of hope and a future that might be better. Clara arrived at the office of her lawyer, Lucinda Winters, in a tall old building in downtown Baksha. As Clara climbed the stairs, she felt nervous. Lucinda's office was cozy, with leather chairs and family photos on the walls. But today, Lucinda wasn't smiling. She looked worried. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Lucinda said. "We've received troubling news from your husband's legal team." Clara's hands went to her stomach, worried. "What kind of news?" she asked. "They're trying to take your baby away," Lucinda said gently. "They're saying you're mentally unstable and acting erratically. They've even gotten your old therapist to say your pregnancy caused a breakdown." Clara felt sick. "But our sessions were private," she protested. "They're using your life insurance to say you never plan to leave for good?" Lucinda explained. "They've even made up stories about your past behavior. We need to fight this." Lucinda suggested they document everything, every moment of control, every threat, and even statements from Clara's new doctor and friends to show she was okay now. As Lucinda was talking, her assistant interrupted with a call from the hospital. "They want to check your medical records for something about a psychiatric hold," the assistant said. Clara's heart sank. Lucinda immediately took charge, telling them to stop asking for her medical records without going through her office. "He's moving faster than I expected," she said. "We need to file for an emergency hearing." Later that afternoon, Clara went back home and noticed the dark sedan parked near her parents' house again. She took a picture of the car's license plate. Her father was already outside, looking serious. "Someone from Boston is asking questions about you," he said. Clara showed him the photo of the car. "They're watching the cafe too," she said. Her father's jaw tightened. "I'm calling Vargas. This has gone too far." Inside, Clara's mother was baking pies, trying to distract herself. She seemed angry. "Your lawyer called. We're giving statements tomorrow," she said. Clara sank into a chair, feeling overwhelmed. "I'm so sorry for bringing this to your door," she said. "Stop that," her mother replied firmly. "You're our daughter. Where else would you go?" The next few hours were filled with phone calls and legal papers. Lucinda moved quickly, filing motions to protect Clara's medical records and challenge the claims against her. Dr. Chen, Clara's new doctor, sent over a report showing Clara was doing well and making good decisions for her baby. As evening fell, Clara's phone buzzed with another text from an unknown number. When she opened it, she saw a message from Damien. "You look tired, darling. Boston misses you." She dropped her phone like it was on fire. Soon, Officer Vargas came over to the house, documenting the message and increasing patrols. "He's trying to scare you," Vargas said. "That's what men like him do when they're losing control." Later that night, Clara felt scared, especially when she saw another text from Damien's brother, Oliver. It said, "Just checking on my favorite sister-in-law. Damien sends his regards." Clara's father immediately called Officer Vargas again. Clara was still feeling down, but she tried not to let it ruin her night. The rain was pounding outside, but she felt a little better when she got another text from Marco. "Still on for tomorrow? I know a place that makes great non-alcoholic mocktails." His message was so normal, so sweet. It made her feel like everything might be okay. Then Marco sent another message. "No pressure. Whatever you need." Clara smiled, feeling a bit lighter. She replied, "Yes, looking forward to it." She wasn't going to let Damien control her anymore. The next day, Lucinda called with news. "We have an emergency hearing scheduled for next week. We're ready for him." Clara felt stronger now. Damien may have money and power, but she had something he could never understand. People who loved her for who she was, not what she could do for them. Later, she stood in front of her childhood mirror, wearing a burgundy sweater dress and boots that were comfortable for her growing baby bump. She felt more like herself than she had in a long time. Her mother, Adriana, appeared with a delicate silver necklace. "This was your grandmother's. I think she'd want you to wear it tonight." Adriana fastened the necklace and said, "Living your life isn't a mistake. You can't let fear stop you from embracing what's happening." Clara smiled at her reflection. At the restaurant, Marco was waiting outside. Clara's breath caught when she saw him. He was dressed in dark jeans and a blue shirt that made his eyes shine. He smiled at her and said, "You look amazing." Clara blushed. Inside, they were seated at a table with a view of the garden, candles glowing softly. Marco had made sure there were non-alcoholic drinks for her, knowing she was pregnant. Clara felt so cared for. They spent the night talking about old memories and hopes for the future. Then, Clara saw someone outside the window. It was Oliver. She felt her heart race. "Who is it?" Marco asked. "My brother-in-law," Clara said. "He works with Damien." Marco immediately wanted to leave, but Clara said, "I won't let them ruin this too." She texted Officer Vargas to report seeing Oliver. Later, when Marco ordered dessert, Vargas sent a message saying everything was safe. Clara ate the chocolate mousse, remembering when she and Marco used to share desserts at school. They talked about simple things like how he wanted to make his father's medical practice better. Clara realized how different he was from Damien, who always wanted to control her happiness. Marco took her hand and said, "I know this is complicated, but I need you to know I'm here for whatever comes next." Clara felt tears in her eyes. Even with all the challenges, Marco was offering her love without trying to control her. When they left the restaurant, Officer Vargas was nearby, keeping an eye out for trouble. At Clara's house, Marco walked her to the door while Tessa waited in the car. Clara stopped for a moment to thank Marco. "Thank you for everything," she said. Just then, her father appeared with bad news. "They found an abandoned car at the restaurant registered to Oliver Lancaster," he said. Clara's heart sank, but she refused to let it spoil her evening. Later, Clara checked her phone and saw a text from Oliver. "Just checking on my favorite sister-in-law. Damien sends his regards." Clara showed it to her father, who called Vargas again. But Clara decided not to let fear control her. That night, as she got ready for bed, She thought of Marco's kiss and smiled at her reflection. She was finally starting to feel free. The next morning, the courthouse was full of people, and Clara saw Damien standing with his legal team. He tried to act concerned, but Clara was ready to face him. She had Lucinda by her side, and her family and friends were there to support her. Damien's lawyers tried to paint a bad picture of her, but Lucinda called witnesses who spoke the truth, and the lies started to fall apart. Dr. Leah talked about Clara's smart decisions about her pregnancy. Sienna talked about how trustworthy Clara was and how she had just been promoted at work. Mr. Bennett, leaning on his cane, spoke about seeing Clara often in the community, saying she was more like herself than she had been in a long time. Throughout all this, Damien sat still, but his clenched jaw showed he was angry. When Lucinda presented evidence of Damien's controlling behavior, like his control of their money and stories from people who used to work for them, Damien stayed calm and looked concerned. During a short break, Clara stepped into the hallway for some water, her hand on her small belly. She sensed Damien before she saw him. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly, just for her to hear. "Look at you, working in a cafe and living with your parents. Is this the life you want for our child?" Clara turned to face him. "Our child deserves to grow up free." Damien stepped closer. "Free to struggle and want things they can't have? I could give them everything." Clara met his gaze. "Everything you gave me was designer clothes, but no real choice. I couldn't choose my friends or have a life of my own. You made me better?" "No, I made myself better. You just made me hide who I was." Before Damien could say more, Mrs. Lancaster Vargas appeared. "They're ready to resume." Damien grabbed her arm, but Marco came forward, his voice serious, and Damien let go. "This isn't over. We'll talk later when we're alone," he said, smiling, but his eyes were angry. Back in the courtroom, the judge listened to closing arguments. Lucinda talked about the control and abuse Clara faced. Damien's lawyer said he had money, resources, and was very concerned about his wife. Finally, the judge spoke, saying he was granting a restraining order. Damien had to stay 500 feet away from Clara and couldn't contact her anymore. Clara felt relieved, almost weak from the feeling. Marco gently squeezed her hand, but Damien's voice broke through. "This is temporary. You'll realize your mistake." The judge ordered Damien to be taken out of the courtroom, and Clara stood strong. "I'm not that woman anymore." Outside, the wind blew the leaves around as Damien was taken to his car. Clara stood with her friends, family, and neighbors. "He won't stop," she said quietly. "I know," said Lucinda, "but neither will we." That night, Clara was sitting on her parents' porch with Marco, watching the sunset. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You can't hide in that small town forever. Everything you love can be taken away." Marco read the text over her shoulder. "He's wrong," he said gently. "Real love can't be taken away. It's given freely." Clara smiled and leaned against him, feeling safer with him beside her. "I'm not hiding," she whispered. "I'm living." November brought early snow, covering the town in white. It had been 2 weeks since the restraining order, and Clara was beginning to feel a little safer. Her baby bump was getting bigger, and people at the cafe were excited for her. One morning, Clara was helping Sienna with the bookkeeping when the door opened. It was Oliver Lancaster, Damien's brother. He smiled and said, "Don't bother calling the police. The restraining order only applies to Damien." Clara put her hand over her belly. "What do you want?" "Just delivering a message," Oliver said, putting an envelope on the counter. Inside were photos of Clara's parents' house, Marco's clinic, her car in different parking lots, and one of her and Marco on his porch. "You've been having us watched." "You and Damien?" Clara asked, trying to stay calm. "Not just Damien," Oliver said. "I'm delivering a message about your disappearing act. The company is worried about Damien's stability. If you don't come back, he might lose everything." Clara shook her head. "That's not my problem." Oliver got closer, his voice soft. Some men would rather destroy what they love than lose it. Sienna's voice cracked. I'm calling the police and every customer I know. She reached for her phone. Oliver straightened his coat. Just think about it. Damien will destroy everything. After he left, Sienna immediately called Officer Vargas. Clara texted Marco to tell him Oliver had been there and they needed to talk. The rest of the day was filled with reports of Damien's movements around town. He was careful not to break the restraining order, but he was trying to make everyone nervous. People in the town started watching for him, and the sheriff had extra patrols out. Clara's lawyer, Lucinda, was planning to get the order extended to include Oliver, too. I don't want to put anyone else in danger, Clara said quietly. No, said James. That's exactly what Damien wants, to isolate you. We need to stand together. Just then, a knock at the door startled them. It was Marco. I just heard, he said. Damien bought the mortgage on your parents' house and is controlling the building where my clinic is. He even made an offer on Lily and Rye. Damien was trying to control everything around her. Clara sat down, feeling dizzy. We can't run, she whispered. We can't let him win. Marco squeezed her hand. We don't run, we stand strong. Suddenly, the lights went out, not just in their house, but all over the street. He's showing us he has power, Marco said. Clara's phone buzzed again. The board meets tomorrow. Come back now, and everything goes back to normal. Stay, and I'll burn everything down. Clara felt her baby kick strongly, and something inside her clicked. No, she said loudly. We're not running. We're not giving in. Let's show him what real power looks like, she said. Not money or threats. Real power is people standing together. She sent a text to Damien. Some things like love, community, and freedom are priceless. See you at the board meeting. Outside, neighbors were already gathering, checking on each other and sharing information. They were ready to stand together against fear. Clara felt strong and ready. The next day, she walked into Lancaster Industries with her family, friends, and community by her side. Damien was waiting for her in the boardroom, but she wasn't there to go back to him. She was there to end it all. I'm not here to return, Clara said, standing tall. I'm here to end this. Damien's mask slipped a little, showing his true self. He said, I built this company by destroying anything that wouldn't follow my rules. Clara turned to the people in charge of the company. Anna, you've seen how he works. He crushes small companies and gets rid of anyone who challenges him. She showed everyone the damage Damien had caused. Dr. Chen talked about how abuse can hurt people's health. Sienna told the story of how Damien threatened her cafe. Mr. Bennett, his voice shaking with age but strong with truth, spoke about how a power outage had hurt vulnerable people. Through it all, Damien stayed calm, but when Marco spoke about how Damien bullied people, Damien couldn't stay quiet anymore. He yelled, How dare you bring that man here, trying to steal my wife and child? Oliver, who was standing up to Damien, spoke calmly, That's not true anymore. I've been meeting with investors. They're going to help me take over. Damien went still, shocked. Oliver showed a paper and said, While you were too busy hurting your wife, I've been working with people to fix things. You betrayed me, Damien screamed. I protected the company from you, Oliver said. He turned to the people in charge and explained how Damien's obsession with controlling his wife had made him make bad decisions. This is how he acts when he can't control something, Oliver said. Clara spoke directly to the people in charge. When Damien can't control something, he tries to destroy it. I'm not asking you to choose me over him. I'm showing you who he really is. Damien laughed bitterly. My wife, my brother, against me? Clara spoke gently. No, Damien. We're finally free of you. Damien moved toward her, but rage was showing in his face. I made you who you are. Without me, you're nothing, he shouted. Step back, Marco warned, standing by Clara. Damien sneered. You'll stop me? Like you stopped me from buying her clinic, taking her parents' house, or threatening her? Oliver interrupted smoothly. You've shown us exactly why you shouldn't be in charge of the company. Damien froze, realizing too late what he just said. The people in charge looked at each other, uncomfortable but also firm. I think we've heard enough, the chairwoman said. Damien, you've abused your power. We are making you leave your job as CEO right now. Damien shouted, but the people in charge ignored him. We support Oliver as the new CEO for now, they said. Security guards appeared at the doors, not the ones who worked for Damien, but the ones who worked for the company. They started to escort Damien out. Damien stopped and pleaded, everything I did was for us, for our family. Clara gently placed her hand on her belly. No, everything you did was for control, but this baby, this life is about freedom, something you never understood. As Damien was taken away, his shouts echoed down the hall. Clara felt a huge weight lift off her shoulders. Oliver walked up to her. I'll fix everything. Mortgages, property deals. I'll make it right. No, Clara said. You're doing the right thing. Outside, the cold winter sun lit up the streets in a soft gold. Clara's friends gathered around her. They were a shield stronger than any guards, ready to take her home. Marco asked softly, Ready to go home? Clara smiled. Not the big penthouse we had before, but a little town where people care for each other, where love is about freedom, not control, where I can raise my child surrounded by real strength. She teased, How about we look at that house on Maple Street, the one with the big backyard and the porch? Marco smiled brightly. The one next to your parents? If you want us to be neighbors. Later, back in a small town, Clara sat on her parents' porch swing, watching the sunset paint the snow-covered mountains pink. Marco had gone to check on Mr. Bennett, but he would be back for dinner. They had fallen into a peaceful pattern of life, just like pieces of a puzzle coming together. Her phone buzzed with a message from Lucinda. The restraining order has been extended. Both brothers are banned from contacting you. Another message from Oliver followed. The company won't challenge your settlement. You deserve a fresh start. Clara didn't answer the messages. Instead, she opened her journal, something she'd started when she first left Boston. She wrote, Dear little one, today I showed you what real strength looks like, not in winning or controlling, but in standing firm in who you are, in letting people love you without trying to own you, and in building something beautiful from something broken. You'll grow up knowing that family isn't just blood. It's the people who stand with you in the storm. Your story starts with freedom, not with an ending, and that's the most important thing. The porch light came on automatically. Her father had fixed it the week before. Inside, she could hear her mother singing in the kitchen as she cooked, a habit from happier times that had returned. A car pulled into the driveway. Marco was back, right on time. Clara closed her journal and stood, one hand resting on her baby bump. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new chances to be brave. But tonight, seeing Marco walk toward her with a bouquet of winter flowers and hearing the warmth of her family's home, she knew with all her heart that this was freedom. This was what love looked like, and this was home. If you were in Clara's shoes, having found out about her pregnancy while being in a hurtful marriage, would you have the courage to start fresh and face all the threats from your powerful husband? Or would you stay in the bad marriage because you were afraid and needed the money? This is a big question that many people ask in real life. It's about choosing between security and freedom, staying with what's familiar, or starting over. It's about whether you want to live with control or fight for your independence. What is real strength and courage? Thank you for watching. If you like this story and want to see more, please subscribe to our channel. That way, you won't miss any new videos. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and share what you think in the comments. We love hearing your thoughts. Also, don't forget to check out the other videos on our channel. We'll see you in the next story.